Hey, what's up techies? Welcome back to my channel. In this video, we will talk about something really important because when working with databases, you want to keep track who made what and when that was made. So this means, for example, when creating or inserting data into your database, you want to keep track who did that and when was that. And for example, when you update something, you also want to keep track who did that and when was the last update. So you might think about creating variables like dates, initializing it manually, and so on and so forth. But this is correct, but this is not the best way. And this includes a lot of updates and a lot of modification. And this will break the principle of open-closed, means an application open to extension and closed for modification. Alright, so in this video, I'm gonna guide you step by step how to use JPA auditing in a secured API. This means that you will keep track of who made what and when. And in a secured API, I will show you how to get the current user or the connected user who performed that action. So follow me on this video, don't miss any part because this is gonna be interesting. Before we start, if you're new to my channel, don't forget to join me and hit that subscribe button. Also, I would like to remind you that sharing is caring, so go ahead and hit this thumbs up button so we can help this video reach more and more people and of course spread the knowledge. Finally, before we start, I would like to invite you to have a look on the new course Spring Boot in Depth that I recently released. It contains everything you need to master the framework. It goes from Spring Core, Spring Beans, dependency injection, special beans, and so forth, DTO pattern, until testing. And when it comes to testing, I will teach you how to use Mockito in order to have well-isolated unit tests. And also we will work with Spring context, so you will know and learn how to use Spring, how to inject dependencies in testing, and this will help you to write end-to-end tests for your application. And for that, I have a really nice gift for you. So I'm offering 30% of this course for the first 500 students that will enroll in this course. You will have the link and the coupon code in the description of this video. Also, I will pin it in the first comment of this video. So don't miss the opportunity and take your career and take your knowledge about the Spring framework to the next level. And I'm sure this will help you land your dream job. So now, with no further ado, let's get started. Before we start coding, let me first tell you where you can find the code. So all you need to do is to go to github.com and then /Ali or just search for Ali-Bouali as a username, and then go to my profile and click on the repositories tab. And all you need to do is to type and search for JWT and you will find this project right here. All you need to do, clone it and you will have the code. Also, if you didn't watch yet the Spring Security video and all the Spring Security list, I would like to invite you to go to my YouTube channel and then click on the playlists and you will find all the playlists that you want, and mainly Spring Security is here so you can navigate to the different ones, and mainly you have here the Spring Security, and if you scroll to the bottom you will find the Spring Security video that I made in the beginning. So now let's go and let's start explaining and introducing this topic for today. Now I will introduce you and explain a little bit what will be the endpoint that we will be using in this course. In the same project, I created a new endpoint for book, for example, just to persist a book. And this one is made of a controller. So as you can see here, we have a book controller and it's reachable under /API/v1/books. And then we have a single endpoint, which is our post mapping in order to save a book. And to do that, we need to call the book service, which will just make a transformation using this book request object and then transform this object to a book. And a book is characterized of these three elements. So ID, author, and ISBN. And then we have our book repository. So it's a classic endpoint. So now let's go back here. And now the question or the next question is, what if I want to track the changes of my entity? Means I want to track when when this entity was created, when it was the last update for this entity, who created it, and who is the person or the user who updated it the last. But before diving to the code, let me explain to you or give you a quick definition about auditing in the context in Spring Data JPA. So the auditing in this context, or in the context of Spring Data JPA, refers to a feature that allows you to automatically track the record changes made to the entity, which is typically the database record in your application. So this is particularly useful for maintaining an audit trail of who made changes, when the changes were made, and what specific changes were made to your data. And the happy news is Spring Data JPA provides already a built-in support for auditing, integrating with auditing capabilities of the underlying JPA provider, such as Hibernate in this case. So now let's start put the first building blocks of our auditing. So first of all, I will go to my entity, to the book entity, where I have this entity annotation. And the first thing that I want to do is to have, for example, a private local date time. And here I will call it create date. So when this entity or when this record was created. And I would like to have, again, another local date time last modified, for example. So when this record was modified, like when was the last time this record was modified. So now in order to make these two objects recordable and auditable, all we need to do is to add two annotations. Spring Data JPA provides us with an annotation called created date. And this created date, as you can see, if we check the documentation here, so I recommend always clicking on download source. So in this way, you can read this documentation. So it says that declares a field as the one representing the date the entity containing this field was created. So it's easy as a pie. All right, so here we have the created date, and for last modified date, we have also a last modified date. So the same, if we check the documentation, it declares the same thing when like containing the field was recently modified. So means when this entity was lately modified. All right, so now we have our entity, we have our auditing, and we have almost everything. So now let's go ahead and write a few tests for this one and make sure and check the database and see what are the changes. So for better testing, I just created a new simple endpoint, a get mapping that will return a list of books, and then it's just repository.findAll. So no logic, no magic in this method. It's just a simple one in order to better test this. Okay, so now what we will be doing next, we will be using HTTP files. So for that, I will just duplicate the change password and I will call it JPA Auditing. I will click OK, and now let's go to this JPA Auditing. We can close the other one, and I will make this one full screen. So the first thing that we need to do always is register a user, since just let me remind you that here in our application properties, we have that the DDL auto is always set to create drop, means each time I restart my application, I wipe all the database data. So I need every time to create or register a new user. So the first thing, we can keep this one. And then what we have, we need to set or to save the token, since this is something that we need. And then finally, let's keep this get query and let's remove the rest. So let's clean up the rest. So for this one, let's keep it. We will come back to it later on. So now I will just create a new step and I will call it create a new book. All right, so creating a new book. So it's a post mapping, and then it's HTTP and our endpoint /API/v1/books. And then we need our authorization, which is this bearer token. So we can copy it from here, and then we can specify the content type, which is application/JSON. And then we need to provide the body. So the body, we have our author, which is, let's say, for example, Alibu. And then we have our ISBN. So ISBN, and then let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, something like that. And then finally, to make sure that everything works and we are able to save the book with the auditing fields and so on and so forth, all we need to do is to query again to do a get mapping, and then it will be /books, and of course we need to pass the authorization header. So now everything is done. All we need to do is to run this test and make sure and check that everything is working fine. So I will just restart my application and see what will happen. So the application is up and running. Now we can run this test. So when we run it, we see that the register is fine and it's returning 200. Same for the books. Also we see 202, which is accepted. And finally, we have the list of books. So the list of books, it was saved to a file, which is this one.json. So now let's go ahead and check it. So we have the ID 1, we have the author, but boom, created date and last modified date, both of them are null. Even in our book entity, we have these two annotation, created date and last modified date. So this was expected for me. So I wanted to show you this because it's super important that you add other few annotations. So the first thing is we need to tell that this entity right here has an entity listeners. So there is an annotation called entity listeners. And for this entity listeners, we need to pass one or many auditing entity listeners. So we have already a class provided by JPA. It's called auditing entity listener. This one, and it comes from Spring Framework Data JPA domain support. So this is the auditing entity listener. But be careful, this is not enough because you need to enable the JPA auditing. And what you need to do, we need to go, for example, here to our main class where we have the security application or where we have the static void main. And here we need to add an annotation, enable JPA auditing. And when we enable JPA auditing, so the application will be able to track all the auditing for our application. Also, you can add this annotation to any class or any configuration class that contains this add configuration. But for me, I just want to make it in the main class so it's visible or I know that it is right there. So now all we need to do is to restart the application, and now we need to rerun the test and make sure that we have our auditing fields. So I will close this one and I will rerun this. So now let's go ahead and check the result. And here, boom, we see that we have our created date and last modified date. But here, there is one thing. Normally this last modified date, it should be null because the entity was not yet updated. All right. But let's go ahead and add another test here. So I will just copy again this one and paste it in the end. And here it will be updating the book. So update the book. And I know that I have only one book and the ID will be always one. So I will use this ID in my query right here. And I need to make one small change in my service right here. So if I go to my book service, and here all I need to do is to do just .id. For book request, I need also to specify private integer ID. So now if I go back here, I can say ID, and that's it. So let me restart the application. All right, so now the application is up and running, and then we can rerun this test. So here, this one, it will update the book. Okay, so now what I'm expecting is to have two fields. So this one and this one should be slightly different from the create date. Okay, so let's go ahead, let's run our tests and check. So again, we can go here. Yeah, of course, we need to query the get again. So now we need to paste this one. So here, query the books, and let's rerun it again. So let's restart our application and let's rerun again the tests. All right, so let me resume it. Maybe this got you a bit confused. So the first thing, we register a user, and then we create a book, and then here query the books or get the list of the books, and then we update one book or update here, let's say one book, and to update a book, we just made a small change to our book request to include the ID, and then we made the mapping with this one. So like this, when we call the repository.save, it will update or create the book. So then we need to query the book one more time to get the list. Okay, so now let me rerun everything again and see. So here we can check directly this JSON file, and if we open it, so here what we see. So we see that we have this create date. Now let me show you the difference. So this is the get for the books. So this is the first get for our books, and if I open this file, we see here that we have the create date and we have the last modified date. But when we performed an update, so this is the second post where we updated the book with the ID number 1. So we see here that the create date is null and the last modified date is slightly different from this one. Okay, but here there is an issue. So the first issue is when I inserted a new book, I want to have only the create date. So the last modified date should be null. And when I update a book, I want the create date to be the same so it doesn't change, and the last modified I want it to be updated. So let me show you how to fix that. So we need to go back to our book entity in here. Let me make it full screen. And now for this created date, we need to add some properties. We need to add some information in order to tell that this is a specific column. So I will use the column annotation. And now I will say this create date is nullable false, so it should not be null. And also I will say updatable false. So this element is only insertable, it's not updatable. And I will do the same, so I can copy the same annotation and I will paste it here. And here I can remove the nullable because the last modified date can be nullable. And here I will say it's insertable false. So this field or this last modified cannot be inserted. It can be only updatable because the default value of updatable is true. So if I insert it, it will be null when I insert a new record, but when I update one single record, this one will not change and this will be only updated. All right, now let's restart our application and let's rerun the test again, and we will double check the outputs to make sure that when we insert, the last modified date is null, and when we update, we do not change or override the value of the created date. I will run the tests, and here let's go ahead and check the data. So what we see in here, so we have the first, so this is the creation, and then this is the first get. So if we click here, we see that we have the created date and the last modified date is null. And then we perform the update, and now let's get the data again and check. So here we see that the created date remained the same and the last modified has changed. So this is how we can perform. Now what we will see next is how can I trace who created this and who was the last person that updated a record in my database. So follow me and let's do it together. Now, in order to track who created the record and who updated the record, we need to provide a bean of type audit aware. So first thing we need to do, let's create a class. So here I will create a Java class in a package. I will call it auditing, and I will call it application audit aware. So application audit aware. And this class needs to implement an interface. So implements audit aware. So we need to implement the interface called auditor aware, and this is a generic interface, and here you can decide what you want to audit exactly. So for our case, I will just track the ID of the user, and now we need to implement all the methods. So we have a method called getCurrentAuditor. So let's go ahead and implement it. As you can see here, this method should return an optional of integer, which is the type that we provided here. So in case, for example, you just want to track the email, you can make it of type string, and then you can return the email. So what we will need to do now, let's go ahead and start implementing this one. So first I will create an object of type authentication, And this authentication is from the package org.springframework.security.core. So I will call it authentication equals, and then I will just break the line, security context holder dot get context, and then dot get authentication. So this will return an object of type authentication. Then we need to make a check. So if my authentication is null, or if my authentication is authenticated, so this one we should negate it. So if the user is not authenticated, so we need to return something. And finally, or if this authentication is instance of anonymous authentication token. This means that if the user is anonymous or we are not able to get the connected user. So then what we need to do is to return this one. So we want to return optional.empty, so it will be an empty object. Otherwise, what we need to do, or what we can do in this case, we will create a user object. So it's from our package com.alibi.security.user, and I will call it user principal, since we are getting the principal in here. So I will cast my authentication to a type user. So it will be user of my authentication dot get principal. And then finally, all I need to do is to return an optional dot of nullable, since this object might be null. So it will be an optional dot nullable from user principal dot get ID. So in this way, here we are getting the ID of the connected user, and this will be provided to Spring using this get current auditor. So now it's not the only thing, we need to do something else. So now we need to provide a bean of type auditor aware, as I mentioned in the beginning. So to do that, let's go to our configuration in here, and let's go to our application config. So here all I need to do is to provide a bean of this type. So somewhere in this class, just you can choose where you want to do it. All we need to do is to create a new bean, and then it will be public, and then auditor aware of type integer, as we mentioned before, and then let's call it auditor aware. So this will be the bean name, and this is super important. And all we need to do is just to return new application auditor aware. So this is like we want to return an instance of the class that we just created. Now we need to tell Spring that this is the bean that we want to use for our auditing. And in order to do that, let's go back to our main application, or our security application, where we have this annotation enable JPA auditing, or if you decide to put it somewhere else, just go to the place or to the class where you have this enable JPA auditing. And here let's open a parenthesis, and we can provide the auditor aware reference. So this is the reference or the bean name of our auditor aware bean. So here make sure that whether you copy the name of this method right here or this bean, or in case you want to provide some name here, so just use the bean name. All right. Okay, so now let's go back, and this will be our auditor aware. All right. So now we need to do something else. So we created all the necessary beans and the implementation, but we still miss something. So let's go back to the book, but we need now to add two new fields, which is the created by and the last modified by. So I will just duplicate these two ones, and then I will change the types. So here it will be created by, and it will be of type integer, and here it will be created by, and here last modified by, for example. And instead of created date, we have an annotation called created by, and the colon should be exactly the same. So the created by should not be nullable, and it should not be updatable. All right. So for example, if the user with the ID 1 created the entity or the record, and then the user with the ID 100 updated it, so we should not update who created this record at the first time. And then for the same here, we have last modified by, and also we need to make it insertable false. All right, so that's it. Now let's go ahead and rerun the test again and make sure that we have this information available for us. So now all we need to do is to start our application, and then let's open the same file. So there is nothing that we need to change in here. All we need to do is to rerun this list of requests again, and let's check the output. So here we have the first get. So after inserting a book, let's check the result. And as you can see here, we have the created and the last modified. And here we have created by the user having the ID number 3, which is the connected user. And we can also check it if it's the correct one in the database. So it's exactly right here. So it's alibu@mail.com. So this is the user that we created. Now, if we go and check the last modified by, and here if we open the last get, and let's scroll down and open this JSON file, we will see that created by still remains the same, and the last modified by is a different user. So here, in case, for example, you want to change the step, and instead, before updating a book, you can register a second user and use the new token here just to update this one, and you will see that you will have a different ID for that. So this is how you can audit records in your database using the JPA auditing.